Hey everybody, I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so we're getting ready to start Chapter 9. I guess we're probably about halfway through the content in the book, maybe even a little bit further. And Chapter 9 deals with community organizing and community building. And these are really critical concepts. As you've seen, as we've gone out to the Harrisburg neighborhood, you kind of see that in action out there. You see the community organizing around some issues and attempting to get some things done. Here we go with Lesson 9. All right, so here are the learning objectives for this lesson. I want you to understand the concepts of community, community organizing, community building, and coalitions. To be able to outline the process for organizing and building a community, and to explain the terms mapping community capacity. And here are some key terms to keep an eye out for as you do the reading and also to listen to the lecture here. I'll let you take a look at those, but you'll see some of the terms there: community building, community organizing, coalitions, ownership. As we talk about mapping the assets in a community, we talk about primary building blocks, secondary building blocks, and potential building blocks, and then perspectives of social action and those types of things. All right, so I've got some images here on the screen, to represent things that we talk about when we talk about community. And I guess if I asked you to describe your community, most people's heads kind of go to their city or their town or their neighborhood within a city, the place where they live. But that's not necessarily the primary feature of a community. But we've got some things here. We've got a picture of some houses. We've got a picture of a mailbox, which represents a place where people live. Over on the right-hand side, it could be a school. It could be an apartment complex. Could be a number of different things. And then the lower right represents a rural environment, a rural community, and then the other two pictures represent people getting together around a particular cause, and other people getting together, perhaps as family or a neighborhood, getting together and enjoying one another. So the idea here is that community really represents a number of people that get together or that congregate around shared values. And so that's really important as you consider what constitutes. All right, so community is a locale or domain that's characterized by the following things: membership, so you consider yourself to be a member of that community or a resident of that community; common symbols such as language, rituals, and ceremonies; shared values and norms, as we've already mentioned; and then mutual influence. So, members of the community have the ability to influence you, and you in turn have the ability to influence others. Other things are, shared needs and a commitment to meeting those needs. And again, you see that in the Harrisburg community, a shared emotional connection, and I hope you have grasped that as you've gone out and sat at the meetings. And then it could be a geographical thing. If we look at the Harrisburg neighborhood, we can basically look at the boundaries of that neighborhood in the form of a fairly large triangle. Okay, so what do we mean when we talk about community organizing? So your textbook definition is a process through which communities are helped to identify common problems or goals, to mobilize their resources, and in other ways to develop and implement strategies for reaching their goals that they have collectively set. And I've purposely highlighted some words here. The one is that we're in to help people. We're not coming in to do for them. We're not coming in to the knight on the white horse to fix all of their problems. What we're trying to do is work alongside them to reach the goals that they have set. And the key words there, it's their goals, so they have ownership and they have collectively set those, and then we're just there to help along the way to facilitate making that happen. All right, so here's some community organizing terms: citizen participation, community capacity, community development, empowerment, grassroots participation, macro practice, and then the concept of social capital. And there are definitions of each of these and explanations of each of these in your textbook on pages 258 to 259. So, be sure to take a look at those. But, the idea here, I think all of these terms are important, but community capacity, what resources does a community have in the form of could be funds, it could be assets, it could be leadership, to be able to do the work that needs to be done. And then do they feel as though they're empowered? Do they feel as though they're capable of getting things done in terms of going to city council or going to the county commissioners and advocating for their needs? Grassroots means it's a bottom-up type of thing. It's not top down from government down. It's the people rising up and advocating for their needs. All right, so some of the assumptions of community organizing that we need to at least adhere to as we go forward. That communities of people can develop the capacity to deal with their own problems. I hope you would agree with that. That people to change and can change. Now, sometimes over the years, people will get into a pattern of just feeling kind of helpless and feeling as though they can't make any changes. Maybe they've tried once or twice and nothing happened, and so they start to feel powerless. But I think the underlying thing is that people really do want to make changes and improvements in their community, and we just need to cultivate that in them. That people should participate in making, adjusting, or controlling the changes taking place in their communities. I'm sure we all agree with that. It's got to come from the people, and that changes in community living that are self-imposed or self-developed have a meaning and permanence that imposed changes do not have. I don't know if you've ever been part of a situation where some change has been imposed from outside, and you just say, "Well, what the heck was that?" Where did that come from? And you really don't agree with it. You don't feel any ownership in it. So the things that come from within the community are going to be far more impactful and far more likely to be sustainable. All right, a few more. That a holistic approach can deal successfully with problems which a fragmented approach cannot. And so that's why in Harrisburg we've done a lot of working with Habitat for Humanity and the Community Foundation of Central Georgia. We've done a lot of planning, and planning that's included the members of the community, and just finding out what their wants and needs are, and then coming up with a long-term plan to address those. That democracy requires cooperative participation and action in the affairs of the community, and that the people must learn the skills which make this possible. So that's that development of community capacity. If it doesn't exist, then what we want to do is try to develop leaders in the community to be advocates for their needs. And that frequently communities of people need help in organizing to deal with their needs, just as many individuals require help in coping with their individual problems. Sometimes you're so caught up in just survival and the needs of daily living that you don't take time to look at the big picture. So the old statement, you can't see the forest for the trees, because you're always dealing with your individual problems, the trees, and you don't take time to look at the entire forest. Okay, so how do we go about organizing a community? There's no really right or wrong way to do this, but there are, what are called older models and then some of the newer approaches. A couple of the older models are, what are called locality development and social planning. So the locality development seeks community change through broad self-help participation from the local community. It's kind of what we've described here earlier. And then social planning involves outside planners coming in. It's very task-oriented. The participation of the community members can be very, very little to a lot. All right, and then there's another perspective called social action, and social action deals with working with a disadvantaged segment of the community, maybe a portion of the community that really has felt powerless to make anything happen, kind of beaten down. Oftentimes we're trying to redistribute resources and power. Some good examples of that over history are the civil rights movement, gay rights movement. These things are primarily focused on the problems, so they're problem-based, but they also require that some kind of organizer or activist comes in and tries to get the pot stirred and things going. Again, you might not like this particular approach. You might prefer another approach. It is an approach, and it's one that's been used over the years to kind of right social injustice. And so here's a chart that shows, basically two different approaches to community organizing and community building. On the left-hand side, a consensus approach where we're trying to get everybody to agree on what needs to happen. And then we've got a conflict approach on the other side. So, some of the social action perspectives are more conflict-based. So you're coming in and you're trying to, as I said before, stir the pot. You're trying to get people even angry about social injustices and angry enough that they're going to go forward and try to make things happen. So, the social action perspective has been named after an activist named Alinsky, so it's sometimes called the Alinsky model. But again, what you're trying to do is you're trying to right some perceived wrongs and to make things happen. So it's an empowerment-oriented approach where you're trying to get people in the community to feel empowered that they can make a change and to do it, very vocally and forcefully. And then on the other side, it's more of a collaborative type approach where you're bringing people together, trying to get them to agree on what the problems are and what the solutions are, and then developing community capacity, building community from within. So it's more of a power with as opposed to a power over type approach, if that makes sense. Again, no right or wrong. Different problems require different kinds of approaches at different periods of time, but these are both effective models that can be used, depending on the circumstance. All right, so as we think about organizing a community and building community capacity, here are the steps that you would want to go through. Number one is recognizing what the issue or the issues are, gaining entry into the community, because most of the time, community organizers are outsiders. We would be outsiders to the Harrisburg community. Now we're gradually, getting our feet in the door and gaining trust, and that's taken a while. It's taken the better part of 5 or 6 years to really feel as though we're accepted in the community. So we've got to gain entry. The people need to organize. We need to do needs assessments, part of our planning models. We need to determine priorities and set the goals for addressing those, and then we need to arrive at our solutions and the intervention strategies that we want to. Then implement the plan, evaluate the outcomes of the plan, and then maintain the outcomes, keep it going, that idea of sustainability, and then using the results from our evaluation to feed back or loop back to the beginning and maybe start working on some different priorities. Okay, so here's a learning activity if you want to try your hand at this. But there's a scenario here where at a recent family connection meeting, you've heard about a high infant mortality rate in Baldwin County. and so on and so forth. And so, who would you bring together from in terms of individuals or agencies that would start to brainstorm about the issue and write a telephone script for a cold call to a person at a particular organization that you think would have something to do with this. And we don't talk a lot on the telephone anymore. I remember not too recently, just my daughters. I mean, we're in this text and email age where it's very impersonal, and I would tell them, well, you need to call so and so about the problem that you're having, and particularly my youngest daughter would say, well, what do I say? Um, we just don't do a good job anymore of talking to people, and I just think that we need to do more of this. So maybe that's just me being old-fashioned, but give this a try. See if you can, write down some notes that you would say if you were going to try to contact someone to come together for a meeting about the infant mortality rate problem. All right, so a few details about some of those steps that we just talked about. So first of all, recognizing the issue. The results are always going to be better if the issue is recognized from the inside. And so if the people from the community identify that this is a problem, as opposed to you coming in from the outside and saying, hey, I think this is a problem in your community, if they come up with it, it's going to have more impact. So the idea of being grassroots from the bottom up, citizen initiated, same thing, bottom up, ownership, all of those are key terms in this recognizing the. Then gaining entry into the community, you need to find out who is it that controls the political climate of the community. And we have that term gatekeepers. So in any community, there are key individuals that control the power, that control the access. And so if we look around our Harrisburg meetings, I'm sure you can identify people that you would need to convince to allow you to come in and help them. So obviously Mr. Simmons, Mr. French, Joe and Gladys Ward, those would be key individuals in the community that we would probably classify as gatekeepers. They're very protective of the community, and so they're not just going to allow anybody to in and do anything. It's the idea that we need to bring those people on board, build trust, convince those people that we can be helpful, and then they allow us in. So business leaders, education leaders, clergy members, particularly in African American communities, the churches and the leaders of the churches are very powerful and influential. Law enforcement, parents, and so on. And it's always good to find a champion. So if you're dealing with childhood obesity, or you're dealing with teen pregnancy, or you're dealing with diabetes prevention, or sexually transmitted infections, who in the community can be a champion for you and can kind of pave the way and help lead the efforts to address those problems. Organizing the people. So initially you'd probably start with a small group, what we call a core group, or executive participants. That was a term from back at one of the beginning slides. But start with a small group, and these are going to be people that are really, really committed. If you think about a target, a target for archery, you've got the bullseye in the center, and then you've got some concentric rings coming out from the center. Well, the people in the bullseye are going to be your core group, your executive participants, and they're going to be the ones that are most invested in the problem. And then you expand that group, and so the concentric rings coming out, first one would be your active participants, not part of the core group, but they're going to be very active in helping you get things done. And then your occasional participants, they may come to a few meetings, once in a while. They're very supportive, but they're not necessarily helping to get all the work done. Maybe their specific part in things. And then supporting participants, which may be providing some funding. I think about the Community Foundation, the Knight Foundation. They're there once in a while. They're not heavily involved in the planning, but they are providing resources that help you to get the stuff done. And so all of those groups together can form what's called a coalition or a partnership, however you want to term it. But it's really a group of individuals that represent different organizations that are all banding together to address this problem or problems that are in the community. All right, and so now we come to doing some assessment of the community. So what capacity does it have to be able to do some things? So we look at asset mapping. And so you focus in doing this asset mapping on the assets and strengths of the community, and there's those terms: primary, secondary, and potential building blocks. And so primary building blocks are individual assets and organizational assets. So the skills and abilities of the residents, individual businesses, financial resources, entrepreneurial enterprises that might exist within the community, and so on and so forth, and then organizational assets, associations like the Chamber of Commerce, citizens associations like a Neighborhood Watch, cultural organizations or activities, and the Harrisburg Festival comes to mind as one of those types of things, and so on and so forth. Faith-based organizations are really critical. So primary building blocks, a good way to think of it, are things that are within the community, controlled by the people within the community. All right, so again, within the community that are controlled by the people within the community. And secondary building blocks, there's a number of those different things. These are things that are, maybe within the community but aren't necessarily controlled by the people in the community. And so a school is a good example of that. It's controlled by the Board of Education, but it might exist in the community. Community members certainly have input, but they don't, directly control that. Police and fire departments, again, there might be a fire station in the community, a police precinct in the community, but the control of that is really outside the community. Libraries, community centers, parks, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got, public institutions and services, private and nonprofit organization, and physical resources. All of these would constitute secondary building blocks within the community, but not under the direct control of the community. And we also, as part of this process, would want to do a needs assessment or a neighborhood needs map. And you can look at an example of that on page 269 of the book. But it looks at, the problems and the issues in the community. And, this map on page 269, I don't know that it, literally represents a map of the boundaries of a community and where all of these things exist geographically, but it does show the relative size of the problems within a community. So, examples like crime, domestic violence, alcoholism, illiteracy, gang activity, unemployment, boarded up buildings, blight, those sorts of things can all be problems within a community that we would need to identify and map in some way according to, some sort of a priority rating system. All right, so these are the remaining steps then of the steps to organizing a community. Once you've done the asset mapping and the needs map, determine what the priorities are and set some goals for addressing those, determining what the solutions are going to be and the intervention strategies that are going to meet those problems, implement the plan, evaluate the outcomes, sustain the work, and then finally, as we said before, looping back using the feedback that you've gotten from your evaluation to either readdress problems in a different way that maybe you weren't successful at, or take on some new priorities. All right, so here's I guess some words of wisdom about reaching consensus. So if you remember back to that slide about the two different approaches, the consensus and the conflict perspective, if you're trying to reach consensus, realize that there's no one best way approach. I've gone into many situations thinking that I had the answer, and then finding out, well, we saw class this year that what our ideas were not necessarily what the ideas of the community were. So you've got to be prepared for that. So go in with an open mind and just sort of let it evolve the way it's going to evolve. Avoid either or thinking. So oftentimes the best solution combines several different approaches, and keep that in mind. If things come down to a vote, sometimes the majority vote is not always the best solution, and so sometimes you need to reboot and go back and again try to steer the argument or whatever back towards what might be best. And that we need to realize that conflict, as long as it's healthy conflict, is okay. You can expect that reasonable people will differ on problems and solutions, and that's fine. That's part of the process. Problems are best solved when participants communicate and listen. I think that's fairly self-evident. And then strategies that you might employ are brainstorming, the nominal group process, focus groups, conflict resolution strategies, and so on, to try to get to that point where we can at least agree on the best way to go. All right, so again, here's another learning activity to try to put some of this theory into practice. So, a group of individuals have come together to deal with a concern about the high rate of teen pregnancy in a community. Identify by job title and function everyone you think should be invited to be part of a larger group or coalition to address the problem, and provide a one-sentence rationale for why you're including each of those people and organizations.